So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 152, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Kuljeev Singh, who's the CEO of ResQ. So ResQ is a SaaS-enabled marketplace that helps make it easy for restaurants to manage repairs and maintenance. It's used by over 5,000 restaurants, and they've also raised over $45 million from top investors. So Kuljeev was an early group chat guest, so this is great to have him back on for follow-up group chat, where we started with a quick refresher on the founding story and first steps for starting ResQ, did a deep dive into it as a SaaS-enabled marketplace, got to learn more about how it's evolved, the recent growth, what the fundraising journey has been like, and also had a great group Q&A. So really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Kuljeev, welcome back, and it's been a while, I believe, 2 years since you first joined us as a group chat guest. So I'm really excited to have you join us here today and dive into the latest with ResQ. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background and what led you to starting ResQ for those that might not know you.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, great to meet everyone. Mike, thanks for having me here for the second time. As you said, I first joined 2 years ago, which was very early days of our business, and seems like it was very early days for what you were building as well. So incredible progress that you've made, and really awesome to watch it from the sidelines and been part of supporting and having conversation with many other folks who are building marketplaces. So really, really amazing stuff that you're doing. Just a bit about my background and our story. I started the business it's been just about 5 years now, although I'd say like the first 2.5 years of the business building through COVID was quite the challenge. So we've gone through sort of many iterations and many changes in the business over the course of the years. My background, I spent about a decade in venture capital as one of my first jobs coming out of school. I was a founding team member of a venture capital firm, Again Partners. Joined, very much on sort of like day one of the business, and we eventually scaled it to raising over $500 million across 3 funds. I was there for about 10 years, led several investments, sat on several boards, had a chance to build some incredible businesses and work hands-on with founders on bringing their vision to light. And along the way, somewhere got the itch of doing something myself and started exploring different ideas and different things. Was always keen on marketplaces as a way to drive value to both the sides, the demand and supply side of the businesses. So I'd invested in quite a few marketplaces myself in the early days and continue to do that as an angel investor today. Around the same time when I was leaving Again to explore new ideas, I come from a family of service workers. My dad ran auto repair shops all his life, so was very keen on what was happening in the service economy, obviously looking at the impact of technology in other verticals. So started exploring everything from restaurants to auto shops to a bunch of other very, very manual, businesses that operate with very little to no technology, and ended up meeting with a restaurant operator who wanted to get out of the restaurant business through that journey. Ended up buying that restaurant and felt that pain point firsthand, which incubated ResQ as part of things that I'd seen during my days. So. Yeah, it's been a wild journey, and but both come from both an investing and operating background, but also owning restaurants, which gives me and our team a very different perspective of what's happening in the space and how to think about it differently.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a great background, and thanks for sharing with us on that. So if we actually go back to to the very beginning, so of course, being a restaurant kind of owner and operator yourselves, and seeing that kind of a problem firsthand, what were the actual kind of first steps that you took to start ResQ as a marketplace?
Yeah, so I mean, if I go back, and I'm sure many operators would say share the challenge. Like even if I go back to 5 or 7 years ago, 2016, 17, 18, the amount of or the impact of technology at the front of the house at the time was huge. I mean, you looked at DoorDash and Uber, which are like many platforms that were coming in to drive net new growth. POS systems were starting to become mainstream with the rise of Toast and many other players in the space. And while all of that was good as an operator, the revenue and growth was being driven up to a great extent, even then through technology solutions. But as soon as you looked at your back of the house, the operations of the business, it was extremely manual, very underserved from a technology perspective. I recall our days, and even today, 2024, when I talk to operators, it still remains to be true that most operations at restaurants, specifically at the back of the house, are being managed with pen and paper at best. So very manual processes, picking up the phone and calling vendors. We saw a consistent issue across our restaurants when it came time to finding folks to do our repairs. And every time it was the lack of understanding of what was done by the previous vendors, no digitization um, of records on what was being completed and what you should be paying for, no accessibility to finding good vendors in the market like Google at best, or you're literally door knocking at neighboring restaurants to see what plumbers they use. So extremely manual processes. And of course, looking at what incredible marketplaces at the front of the house have done, this idea that you can aggregate demand and supply, and assuming you can deliver a much better experience to both the sides of the marketplace, you can leverage your economies of scale to create a very differentiated experience. We started early days, very traditional. At the end of the day, we're a B2B platform, and we knew that from day one. But obviously, when you look at like what other marketplaces have done, you sort of like take those ideas. So, it became very much of a mobile first product where you need a plumber, you go in, you get access to one, they go and complete the repairs and view on the transaction flow. But it was very much focused and curated towards single unit operators where there was a transactional need of getting something completed. COVID changed a lot of things for us, and we evolved much more to the platform we have today, truly a B2B company with like the sort of like software first layer with an embedded marketplace. But early days, it was a pure play marketplace without any SaaS component to it.
Yeah, no, that's a great kind of a refresher for us as far as the early days of starting it for those that joined in on the first kind of group chat. So you mentioned, of course, is starting more of like a pure play marketplace, and then moving into being kind of building out like more SaaS tools, and going kind of more vertical. So what kind of led to that?
Yeah, as when COVID hit us, we were still very small at the time. We had just gone to market or just launched our product in the market, and as I said, it was a very transactional product. The thing that we learned quickly was primary customer base being smaller multi-unit or single unit operators primarily went out of business. As you started talking to more and more restaurant operators at the time, we came across many larger multi-unit operators, kind of not the 1 to 3 units, but like 5 to 50, 5 to 100 unit operators. And cost controls became a very, very important thing for restaurant operators, which still continues to be true today. If you look at the P&L of restaurant operators, every single line item from a cost perspective is either going up or becoming very hard to control. Obviously, when your revenue is impacted and when margins are being impacted, you want to have more and more management capabilities on the cost side, and that came in as a factor of we need tools to get certain approvals done. We need tools so that we have visibility into what was being completed at our restaurants. We need tools so that our accounting team is in check on what is being completed, what they're paying for. And we need tools to help us find the best vendors at the best rates possible to complete those repairs in a single go. So it's very clear that we had to expand our horizons to go from I need access to someone and I need it completed in the fastest and the cheapest way possible to I need a suite of offerings now to have better controls, better workflows, and better visibility to what's happening top down at my restaurants. So that was on the demand side of the equation. As you started to work with the supply side, which for us is local service businesses, everything from HVAC to plumbing companies to electrician companies, etc., they had similar sets of challenges for them. Obviously, coming out of COVID, while that has changed now, early days the demand part was hard because most restaurants were shutting down or were controlling the spend dramatically. As these groups were growing and scaling, it was not just driving that new growth through them. If you look at their P&L is made up of a lot of, everything from fixed or variable costs that could be shaved off to create better operating margins for them, which comes in the form of workflows. So as we started to reinvent ourselves post-COVID in 2020 and 2021, really the focus was, let's build the workflow automation and the suite of offerings that both the demand and supply side need, which will enable them to come to ResQ for a software perspective. And then as we aggregate demand and supply in specific geographies, we can have this embedded marketplace layer, which has turned out to be true now. We've got multiple markets, we've got the embedded marketplace. So really, at its true essence, we are our stakeholders, our marketplace stakeholders come to the software stakeholders come to ResQ for the software product and say for the marketplace. Um, and there is an internal mechanism from a distribution standpoint on how we get access to both demand and supply. But today, 90% of our supply, if not more, actually comes inherited from the restaurant operators who bring supply onto the network, and then they use ResQ's tools to start managing and operating their supply base. And then over time, as we build aggregation in those markets, we leverage our products and our buying power to deliver a much better differentiated experience to the end customer.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting. There's so much in there that we're going to kind of get to, and probably lots of questions during the group Q&A around it. But I guess it sounds like if we focusing on the demand side, it sounds like you kind of moved up market when it comes to as far as the restaurants.
Yeah, that's correct. This was intentional and it's worked well for us in many ways. One, moving up market into multi-unit operators gives you both brand equity that you need in a market. I mean, operating for a multi-unit operator within a specific geography allows you to have a better reach. Gives you a better brand, especially when you're launching in a new market. Second thing is most multi-unit operators are structured, so there is need for specific workflows. It's not that we are not building or we don't want to focus on smaller single unit operators. Like that in the DNA of the company. I was a small unit operator, but we find that the sequencing of how we place and how we unlock net new products and services and offerings is extremely important for the long-term success. So for example, smaller unit operators or smaller multi-unit operators, single unit operators primarily require the marketplace and care less about the software tooling because they are themselves operating behind the restaurants and they don't need the approval flows and all the workflows that you typically need for a larger multi-unit. But in order to get to that level of leverage where you can truly influence the end experience, you need buying power over the supply side. And we feel that buying power comes from multi-unit operators. So this is our strategy is we want every restaurant operator to use ResQ over time. But a strategy starting from the multi-unit operator gives us the leverage that we need to then unlock the net new value to single unit operators. So it's purely a sequencing of events.
Yeah, no, definitely. Sequencing was a topic that I wanted to discuss a little bit more. So, so how do you think about that when it comes to, I would say like sequencing into, new kind of products or kind of features, or even like layering on new services or offerings?
Whether it's how we do product building or whether how we take our products to market, or how we unlock net new, profile of customers within the business, it's all embedded into being very selective of understanding the pain points of customers. So where our DNA has been very, on the ground hands first, which is how this business was formed. Even until today, we spend an enormous amount of time with our customers, with both restaurants and with both our suppliers to really understand the problem set. And as these groups are growing and scaling, there's many asks that comes in that, hey, integrating with accounting softwares would be really, really awesome. And it would help reduce our operational burden in the business, or suppliers coming in asking for, hey, for a small supplier operating in a market, cash flow liquidity is important. So we take all this feedback and we've got an internal mechanism to really parse the feedback to really understand like how can we place the correct things the things that we build in a manner that one, it creates win-win for our marketplace participants, but more importantly also allows us to graduate to the next stage and allows us to play for the next stage. So it's a factor of just how we take feedback. But internally how we build things is we've got dedicated teams, one very much restaurant focused, one very much supplier focused. Both teams are building workflow automation software for both the sides of the marketplace to get more engagement, to create that new value for them, to help them reduce their operational burden and manage their operating costs. And as those comes into play, we get, we drive more engagement, and with more engagement comes in how you sort of like create the perfect dynamics of then enabling discoverability and enabling trust of transacting with each other to the marketplace. So one is like making it extremely easy for them so that they can transact on ResQ. And once that starts to happen, the second part is making it easy for them to trust the marketplace experience on ResQ.
Yeah, no, that's really great. So I guess it might be helpful. Can you kind of like walk us through like what that experience is like, maybe on the restaurant side, and then maybe even on the service kind of provider side using ResQ?
Yeah, so today restaurants would sign up on ResQ because they want cost management, visibility, cost controls, streamlined workflows. Like 90% of the restaurant operators don't use any sort of technology to manage their repairs and maintenance. So our biggest competitor, while there's some competitors in the market, our biggest competitor continues to be pen and paper and spreadsheets at best. And as the groups are growing and scaling, that becomes enormously hard. So we provide a software-first product that allows for all those things: work order management, asset tracking, approvals, code thresholds, and as a factor of that, a repair and maintenance or facilities management software is nothing without the enablement of transacting with your local service company. So one, they buy the software to have better controls and better visibility and better workflows. They onboard their suppliers on ResQ, which is how we get connected to the supply base. So because it comes to the restaurants, it becomes very simple and straightforward for the suppliers to transact. So it's a very demand-bring supply onto the network. And as we're aggregating more in demand and supply in the markets, then we use mixture of traditional and very creative ways to create this embedded marketplace where as we have more demand and supply in the market, we now start to see how certain suppliers are performing because we've got very strong understanding of the performance metrics for the customer that introduced that supplier to begin with. And as we start to see the good suppliers, we parse those out, have the conversations with them, and provide net new value to them, both from a marketplace as well as payment standpoint, to create a very differentiated experience for them. Once they sign up on ResQ, they provide differentiated and better experience to our end customers in terms of rates, quality, turnaround time. And that creates this magic within the marketplace that allows restaurants to come and discover net new suppliers, and then the ability to transact with them when needed. So it's very much intrinsic from a software first, start with a software first model. Supply comes from demand, and then and through aggregation we create this embedded marketplace.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the upfront as far as a few times now. Demand kind of inviting supply, and with marketplaces, of course, one side inviting the other, kind of making it a little bit easier. Of course, it is very challenging. But could you maybe share a little bit more around maybe the reason why kind of the demand side is inviting suppliers, and then kind of how that helps you build ResQ as a marketplace?
Yeah. So if you look at like the intrinsic challenges in the industry, we strongly believe that both the demand and supply side of the market actually means really well. Oftentimes we hear like the industry standard is like a negative NPS score, right? Like if you look at the core experience that's happening in the offline world, it's bad for many reasons, but it's not because the marketplace participants are doing anything or mean bad. It's because there is lack of visibility, tooling, communication. For example, like it's very common to see an issue happening at a restaurant and someone picks up the phone and calls their service company and says, my dishwasher is leaking. And oftentimes you don't know if it's a dishwasher problem, is it a plumbing issue? So one is like the lack of understanding of what's actually happening at the restaurant level, which creates a better way for the supplier or the service company essentially to have to come in much more prepared. That doesn't exist in the market. It's purely happening on phone calls. You're sharing text messages, sharing some pictures here and there. Second is there is lack of understanding of the history. Like if you look at an average equipment, because a lot of the supply side don't even know what was done in the past, what was being corrected, what parts was installed, that also leads to an overall bad experience. Third is oftentimes with multi-unit operators, who are sophisticated groups, you require approval flows. You can't just show up at a restaurant, do a bunch of work, and slap a $2,000 invoice on the desk and expect to be paid, right? Like oftentimes the finance team or the regional management teams will ask, who asked for this repair? Should we have waited? Should we continue to repair this? Or we've invested so many dollars and should we replace it? There's so much goes into the actual decision-making of the end repair experience. Which is why we believe the offline experience is very broken because a lot of things are not happening. Clear communication is not happening. Clear expectation setting is not happening. We hear this all the time that, hey, I just wanted someone to come and do a small patch job and charge me a few $100 versus, previously a vendor came in and now it's charging me $2,000 to change the entire unit, right? But that's not that's an expectation setting problem. So it's really breaking those things down into its most granular level to understand how we share better information between the participants of the marketplace so that both the sides have a good understanding of what is to be done, how we share historical data. So today you go on ResQ, you can actually see how much have I spent on the piece of equipment from a repair perspective or maintenance perspective, and should I replace this? We leverage AI into that as well to inform you on what certain costs should be, what your budget should look like. You talk to restaurant operators today, they don't even know, what the average spend should be. Like, what should they be budgeting for this year? So we use a lot of everything from expectation setting to streamline communication to setting the right guardrails that the supply and the demand side can perform within, to then guiding them towards what cost should look like, how much a certain piece of equipment should cost, how much should certain repairs cost. All of these things, which are broadly categorized as in the sort of like workflow bucket, creates this differentiated experience where both the participants start to play or start to participate in the marketplace in a manner that gives them access to the data that they need to perform that end repair well. That's really been the thing that we've really focused on over the last couple of years. It's, if you look at, not undermining any marketplaces here, but like our marketplace, because there's no standardization, you can have two plumbers go to the same restaurant for the same repair, do it very differently. Because there is no standardization, there is lack of best practices, there is lack of clear expectation setting. We are in many ways changing a very, very legacy industry where we believe the participants want to play well but lack tools to play well. So our goal is to create those tools to allow them to transact in an easy manner and in a manner that they can trust each other for the end outcome. And then obviously us being the sort of platform that enables the experience, we set the right guardrails on when certain repairs should be done, what are the expectation settings from an SLA standpoint, what should you be costing for certain repairs, by when should you be approving these invoices from a payment standpoint. But those are the things that we bring in, but the core experience is really enabling more and more through better workflow automation.
Yeah, you mentioned as far as kind of I would say a lack of standardization comparative to maybe some other kind of marketplaces where they have or industries, and I was going to ask on that. So also too, I guess it's worth noting that you're a local marketplace, right? So of course there's kind of all the nuances that are involved with local markets. So I guess like where are you guys at as far as today as far as like how many markets that you operate in?
Yeah, so if we were a pure play marketplace business, we would be very, very confined to the geographies that we operate within. But because our marketplace is embedded within our core software offering, and the software itself can be sold in any part of the country, broadly speaking, it doesn't restrict us from launching or signing up customers in new markets. So today, for example, we operate in 3 countries: Canada, US, and the UK. US, we operate everywhere from Maine to Hawaii, like one spectrum of the country to the other spectrum. Really, customers can sign up because they're onboarding their own suppliers and using ResQ to transact with their supply. There is no restrictions around where they can operate. But as we start to build and aggregation in those markets and launch embedded marketplace, that obviously has a regional strategy. There we're primarily focused on. We don't think about it from a city's perspective, because demand for us multi-unit operators spill over into neighboring cities. For example, like if you have a 10-unit operator in New York, that it's very low likelihood that all their 10 restaurants will be in New York. They likely will have 1 or 2 in Boston or Philly or DC, right? So naturally, demand takes us to net new markets. So that's why we have this sort of regional focus rather than hyper-localized focus. But regionally speaking, we look at New York as a hub around Boston, DC, Philly. So that's sort of like that ecosystem. South, which is hubbed in Dallas and Austin, where we have neighboring cities and neighboring states that we operated within. South Florida being a market, but everything from Miami to Fort Lauderdale all the way to Orlando. Chicago, the West Coast, SFLA. So I'd say like 5 markets, but as I said, these are not necessarily hyper-localized markets. They're more regions from our perspective.
That's very interesting to learn more about. So I guess, are you kind of like selling the tool and then kind of like layering on the kind of marketplace?
That's correct. So even within our sales conversations, our go-to-market approach is very much around the software tooling, and the marketplace is an embedded component. Look, there's every customer we talk to, every restaurant operator we talk to, most require access to net new supply. So it's important on how we make those commitments. There's certain ways that we profile local vendors in a market that are willing to deliver a much differentiated experience to our end customers around better pricing, quality, service standards. And then we group those things in what we broadly call marketplace liquidity. And then we say, hey, we operate across the country. You can bring your suppliers anywhere. But in these markets, you will start to see access to net new supply.
So you and I could, of course, kind of go on chatting, about ResQ for quite some time here, and I want to save time for the group Q&A. But one of the topics that I wanted to chat about, because I know we couldn't really talk about it last time, was your latest funding round, and you've raised from some pretty awesome investors. And so, what has the fundraising journey been like, and maybe your last round?
So yeah, I mean, look, we've been very fortunate to have some incredibly strong investors on the table. We've raised 3 successive rounds of funding, last one being our Series A back in 2021, so about just over 2 years ago. We're still in a very good position from a capital perspective. We raised more capital than we needed, like many companies did during that time, but we were very thoughtful in where we spend the capital. We got tons of runway ahead of us. We do plan to get ready for our Series B at some point over the course of this or next year. But really, the core focus has been on the core unit economics of our business, driving net new value to the customers, enabling a stronger distribution and go-to-market strategy. But yeah, in total, we raised about an aggregate of just shy of 50 million across those 3 rounds, and in a very healthy position, both from a unit economic and a cash-based standpoint.
I actually had a question from a founder that sent it to me before the chat related to fundraising, so I was just gonna go ahead and ask it. But they were asking about, as far as being like a SaaS-enabled marketplace. Were you finding yourself fundraising early on, maybe where investors were trying to bucket you as like maybe SaaS or a marketplace? And how did you maybe think about that?
No, if I actually go back to even if I look at a Series A. We did come across a few groups we met who actually had a tough time sort of like breaking down the SaaS work in the marketplace model. I still remember, and look, nothing against any investor. I think everyone's got their thesis. But one group had said, like, no one has been able to be successful, having sort of like a dual strategy. One group had told me, like, your sort of like core economics will not change in terms of like what your ACV per unit could be at scale. I mean, truth be told, like both those things we've tackled well. Like our ACV per unit is up 7 or 8x in the last year and a half. We do have a dual revenue strategy in terms of how we monetize on the demand side, how we monetize on supply side. And it's been a bunch of iterations to get there. The thing that we often go back to is like, we're not a pure play SaaS company. We're not a pure play marketplace company. We're a software company. We're a software first company which has an embedded marketplace. The word embedded is very important. You can't come to ResQ just to get access to the marketplace and say, I don't want any of the software tooling. I just want this, right? So you're essentially signing up for the software offering, which is where we come in and say, like, we're a software first company. And then where needed, you have the embedded marketplace where you can opt into. We still have customers that will use 70, 80% of the supply that they brought onto ResQ. And then over time, they tip over into the marketplace. And we have customers today that do 80, 90, or even close to 100% of the marketplace. But that's a journey we take the customers through as they build trust into the marketplace. So I think without a doubt, we got grouped earlier on, but investors who saw the bigger picture and saw that we're solving a very, very operationally complex problem and the big vision we've got in terms of who we want to become and how we want to impact the industry, we were able to get them. So been very fortunate and excited around it.
Yeah, that's going to be really helpful. So, hey, Amantha, do you want to come
on? What was the pricing strategy for coming up for the cost of the software to charge?
Great question. The answer is there was no strategy. I mean, this is all pricing elasticity, like that you test over time. To be honest, like we looked at traditional software systems that operate within a restaurant setting, POS systems, etc. And we said, like, hey, where is the comfort level of restaurant operators to pay a certain amount? And what does that look like? And that's where we started. And we said, like, hey, POS charges $50 to $150 a month per location. So we should test at the bottom end and sort of like build it up over time. I think the importance is like 2 things. One, we started, I'd say, low enough that pricing did not become a barrier to entry for us. And then what we did was we have changed pricing now, I believe, 4 times. And the more the more density we have in a market, the more products we launch, the new cohorts of customers come in at a better price. Now we actually have a very tiered pricing approach. We have 3 different tiers of the product offering. Up until like end of last year, quite literally very recently, we had one single pricing. But it's honestly been just testing a bunch of pricing. I mean, we still deal with this, but this is the early stage nature of any company. We have customers sometimes in the same market that are paying 2 different prices. Now, we worked a lot over the last 6 months to standardize those pricing, but I think it's much more of an art than it is a science in the early days. And then you push the pricing to the level where you start to test it in sales cycles to see what is the friction point around what someone will be willing to pay. And that has remained true for us, both on the demand side as well as on the supply side.
Yeah, thanks for sharing with us on that, Kuljeev. So pricing is always a fun topic to chat through. So
building two-sided marketplace is always complex. You want to monetize on both sides because you're creating differentiated value. In a market where we're not creating supply, I mean, if you look at Uber, DoorDash, etc., like they have the ability to create net new supply. For us, we're not creating supply. Service companies exist out there. They are operating, they're building businesses. We are building a platform that allows, our vision is that will allow service companies to deliver a much better end experience to the end customer by creating win-win scenarios for both the sides. When you're doing that, pricing becomes tricky, especially on the supply side of the equation. Is like, what is your take rate? What can you charge? What can you charge so that the supply side doesn't flow through that take rate to the demand side? How do you monitor that? So that's where we spend a lot more time on historically. But coming to the exact sort of number has been, you start low enough and you just sort of like build it up over time as you continue to test elasticity, both on the demand and supply side.
Hey, Kuljeev, actually had a question to ask Samir before they jumped off, but they were asking, what's been the biggest learning around hiring and team building?
Look, we've gone through a lot of iterations of this. I think anyone building early stage companies, from 2020, let's call it 2020 to like 2023, talent has been sort of like top of mind where, people were willing to pay top dollars, and sort of like early stage small startups like us had to compete with that. We've tried everything from hiring, bringing on ex-operators within operationally complex marketplaces to, finding folks who have sort of like the MBA or professional services, banking, consulting background, to ex-operators within restaurants and within some of the service companies. So we've got a big mix match of team internally. The thing that we were very mindful of was, while we competed well, we didn't deviate away from who we wanted to become. So while the market was very frothy, we stuck to our sort of our DNA on our guns around like, hey, what are the ranges we want to pay within? What is the type of talent we want? It worked very, very hard to go and find that talent. We made many mistakes along the way. We had many successes along the way. But sticking, true to the culture and the DNA of the business was important all along the way. But many mistakes in the middle. Today, our team is about 70% of our team is centralized around our HQ, which is in Toronto. It's primarily our engineering, product, and support teams, customer-facing support teams. And then all our go-to-market is on the ground. So in the main cities that we operate within is where we have sales and marketing. It's local.
Awesome. Hey, Michael, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. And it's fascinating to hear the dual aspects of software and marketplace. So super fascinating. I had 2 questions, actually. One is, in terms of providing restaurants with this visibility into their costs, have you had to go beyond services? And, I'm thinking like linens and other costs. Have you had to like expand in terms of what your software encompasses? That's my first question. And then my second, if you have time, is what other things besides payments are you facilitating through, like, is there messaging? Is there the scheduling of the appointments and all that as well? So
yeah, great. Both great questions. So the answer to the first one is, the short answer is yes. Historically, when we started, it was very specific to food and beverage equipment, like physical assets at a restaurant. So your HVAC units, your hoods, your fryers, your ovens. And this was actually a pull from our customers. Like, as you started to see the impact of data that they're seeing, the visibility and controls they had in place, the ease of use and how they can transact with local service companies, with those checks and balances in place. We started to get pulled from, hey, can I bring my plumbers and my electricians, and can you do it? To the extent where now actually customers are also pulling us beyond repairs and maintenance, and they're saying, hey, I'd love to run my utilities through ResQ, I'd love to run my resilience through ResQ. So we've been very selective in sort of like what we say yes to, what we don't, because at the end of the day, we want to deliver a differentiated experience to both the demand and the supply side through tooling. But yes, it's all been around how customers have pulled us in that direction. What we didn't go do early days, what we didn't go say and do early days is like, you can use ResQ for whatever you want. So you tell us, we'll build around it. So we started small and just sort of like, as the customers are pulling us, we made it very simple and straightforward for them to enable more categories. On your second one, around what are we facilitating? So we, on ResQ, you've got the entire, what we call the repair workflow. It starts with, I've got a problem and I need to submit a work order, which we will call work order management. The second step is I need to ensure that this work order goes through the right approvals, because sometimes the staff on the ground does not have spend limits beyond a certain amount. So who is responsible for providing that? Third step is I need to find a vendor. Fourth step is I need to schedule with the company. Fifth step is someone has to come in and complete that. Sometimes there's quotes involved if it's going to go over a certain threshold. Sixth step is I'm submitting my invoice, which I have to go through the invoice approval flow. Seventh step is I need to get paid. All of those steps, now I'm oversimplifying this, is much more complex, but all of those steps are enabled to ResQ. So today, everything from asset tracking, work order management, approvals and controls, down to customers paying and vendors getting paid on time is all possible on ResQ.
Those are great questions. Can be super helpful. So appreciate it, Kuljeev. Hey, I actually had another question from someone that posted it in advance in the community. And it was a SaaS-enabled marketplace founder. And they were asking, when you're building a SaaS-enabled marketplace, it's often hard to kind of think about how much you prioritize SaaS as kind of like a standalone offering, maybe even from like, product strategy, kind of like more overall. Kind of versus the kind of connectivity of the marketplace. So, how do you think about that?
We suffered with this a lot. Like, frankly, it's very, when you're building a SaaS enabled marketplace, two, when you've got two very fragmented sides of the market, restaurants and local service companies. Three, when there's no standardization. If you look at the complexity of what we're trying to build, it's like 10x. So it's very easy to get distracted on like, let's just do this thing or let's focus on this. And we made some mistakes along the way over the past few years. I think what we've realized is like, it's very important to know what you want to become, and very important to then think through what do you need to do today to get there. So we made a lot of our focus over the last years building the right tooling, both for the demand and supply side, so that they can use ResQ with the ease and level of controls that they want to deliver the end experience that they want to deliver. So that became the focus. It was very much software first tooling. And then as we were building those tooling, as we were building those tools on the software first side, we didn't lose sight of the fact that who we want to become. There's certain ways you can build products, and you can say, okay, you take journey A or journey B of building the product. We chose a journey that said in the long term, we know that we want to have embedded marketplace model. So how do we enable that transaction today? How do we get them to communicate to it? So it's building for what they need today, but keeping in a very strong eye and a vision on who do we want to become over time. And that requires prioritization. And we have learned over time that ruthless prioritization when you're building a complex business like this is extremely important. So yeah, last couple of years has been very much building the software tooling first, so that we can have, at the end of the day, for us at least, there is no marketplace if we can't create that ease of transactions for both the sides to transact within. But we never forgot that marketplace is a very important thing that we want to build over time, because that's where the true like explosive value can be created for both sides.
And that's going to be really helpful. So I'm glad you mentioned that, ruthless prioritization. So that's definitely important when, as you mentioned, when building operation complex marketplaces. So sometimes we get kind of, lost, kind of caught up in things when it's all the complexities.
We get lost all the time.
That's also comforting to hear. So, hey, Amantha, I saw you raise your hand again. Do you want to jump back on?
Can you speak a little bit about the early stage sales process? Like, were you going door to door to restaurants? Were you cold calling? And then what was like the handoff or communication between like sales, customer success during the onboarding processes?
Yeah, so our internal organization in many ways is very complex because of the nature of the customer base that we deal with. Everyone would want to sort of like build this picture perfect onboarding flow where customers just join, go online, put in their credit card, and they follow a bunch of steps, and all of a sudden they're live within a matter of a few hours. The reality is, because we're a two-sided marketplace and there's a component of onboarding your suppliers, that becomes very complex. So there's multiple stakeholders you have to deal with. So you're going to build the right workflows for both stakeholders. Then the sales cycle itself is complex. The bigger operator that you deal with, there's multiple layers. You're dealing with the facilities team and the operations team and the finance team. Historically, in a world where, as I said, 90% of restaurant operators don't use anything. So there is no sort of like budgets in place to pay for software. So now you are sort of like changing that behavior. So there's a lot of complexity around it. So the way, on the go-to-market side, it's primarily been outbound from, like, we have an inside sales team that operates within markets. We don't door knock, we don't pull doorknobs. The reason why those teams are in the markets is we find that they build their pipeline, through sort of like traditional channels, looking at lists, cold calling, etc. But oftentimes the ability to meet with customers face-to-face has a huge impact to it. So that's why we placed our go-to-market teams in the market. We do, as markets start to mature for us, we see a tip-over point where a majority of of our customers start to come through referrals and word of mouth. Like if you look at some of our most dense markets, like New York, Miami, example, like these markets have an outsized number of inbound word of mouth referrals coming in. Without us paying for that, like it's not a strategy that we have actively invested in, the fact that let's just deliver really, really awesome experiences to customers and make it a very sticky product. And I'll tell you, especially operating in the restaurant space, like good news travels fast and bad news also travels faster than good news. So we have to do all the right things in the early parts of the journey to create those aha moments, which enables the sort of like flywheel to start working. So we intrinsically have a demand to supply flywheel because every operator brings their suppliers on, but we're also building very deeply a demand to demand flywheel. But all the early parts of any journey is going and establishing your presence in the market, doing a lot more outbound. But we have a very selective account-based strategy. So when we do go after certain markets or we do go after certain regions, we know the type of customers we want. We know the bigger customers in those markets that can unlock the brand equity that we get demand for. So when we launch a market like New York, or DC, or Chicago, or LA, it really becomes about finding those top accounts that can enable us and help us build brand equity. So that's on the go-to-market side. What we have realized in the last 6 months now is we're transitioning more and more to, as we transition more and more to the account-based strategy, we're also realizing like most restaurants are not easily discoverable, so we have to go meet them where they are. So events has become a big part of our strategy now. Doing partnerships with other players that broadly sit within the restaurant's technology stack has become a big part of our strategy now that we're investing in. So, but that's been an evolution, but it all started sort of like, very much outbound from day one. And on the onboarding side, still very complex, but we've got multiple teams internally. Sales is responsible for closing and does the handoff to a very specific onboarding team that has ownership of that account from signing till go live. Not even just go live, but through the first few work orders and experiences, just so that we can make sure that the early experiences are good, and then it gets passed over to our account management team.
Well, cool. Well, we're almost out of time here, but yeah, Kuljeev, thanks for taking the time to join us here today. This is great to have you back on and hear the latest and kind of dive into more some of the specific kind of topics and questions that we had here with ResQ. Definitely super impressive to see what you built. So I actually had one last question for you before I wrap things up, and I guess this is probably a newer question than I started asking at the end of group chats. But if you could go right back to before you started ResQ, what would you tell yourself about marketplaces specifically?
We often talk about this internally. I think the mistake we made, and I'm sure that many make, or at least I think that many make, is you look at your marketplace or the type of business you're building, and you try to replicate another marketplace business that have been successful. You look at the Ubers and the DoorDash and the Airbnbs of the world and the Fairs of the world, and you say, oh, I'm just going to do those things. I think that's very common, and we were certainly, we certainly suffered with that. I think no two marketplaces are made the exact same way. every marketplace is different from the other one, which requires a strategy and evolution of how you think about sequencing your marketplace correctly, building the right product around it. So the thing that we learned is like staying very, very close to the customers, talking to them often, understanding their pain points, and really specifically building products and solutions that work for them with this bigger vision that you've got in mind is important. Oftentimes, I see us doing it, and I see many people doing it, is like there's a world you want to create, and you just start creating that world without knowing that today when the customers care about that world or not. So that was our big learning, is like no two marketplaces are the same. We try to replicate the playbooks that have existed in the past. And many ways we learned that we have to create our own playbook.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely guilty of that myself. So, and that's going to be a great parting advice for us as well. So, and last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
Yeah, so I just typed my email address just on the chat here. It's kj@getresq.com. Please reach out to me. You can also reach out to me through the Everything Marketplace platform. I'd love to chat more. Love to learn from you guys. Love to share our learnings that we've had along the ways. But very, very fortunate to be a part of what Mike's building, and always happy to grab a virtual coffee or chat and discuss all things marketplaces.